All right, I'm Tommy Williams. I'm the founder of a company called Plinx. We're a construction technology company based in Malvern, Worcestershire. We're 6 years old and we're 14 people at the moment, so still a relatively small business compared to some of the companies you will have heard from already today. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the power of good information, as that's our broad remit of what we do. And just to explain what we do as a system and what the services we provide, some of you may already know us. We provide three core elements to our customers. They are called Protect, Connect and Effect. So Protect are physical smart tags that are deployed around the construction environment. They attach to construction workers' helmets, to machines and to cones, barriers, edge protections, which form zones. These sensors generate information about activity on site. They help you understand where risk is and how to potentially mitigate that risk in a timely manner. The second element is called Connect. So these are rapidly deployable private networks that within an hour of a site being live, you can start capturing data from the three sensors that I mentioned earlier. Currently that's a private proprietary technology. But we are moving towards 5G, where we'll be able to expand the use cases to smartphones, robotics, drones, some of the things that this community already talk about quite widely. The advantage of Connect is being able to extract data from a construction site in real time and to be able to action it as soon as possible. Data is routed from the sensors through the Connect network into a web platform called Effect, which is where you can configure your site. You can understand more about restrict access to machines or to people. You can connect over API with geospatial systems, with GIS systems, with access control systems that you probably already have on your site if you're already into this kind of thing. So the system works as a whole. And I'll give you some examples of how it works later on in this presentation. So I think I'll just start with a question, if I may, and you don't have to answer this, I've got an idea already. But how do we, as construction companies, how do we know when something has gone wrong? Does anyone have a view on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being before it happens, we're predicting it, to 10 it's too late and we've actually got to put in some significant changes in place to get back on track? Anyone? 6? 10. Anyone else?
Definitely towards the right-hand side.
Good answer. So yeah, in my experience, I believe it is more towards the reactive side of things. So usually some sort of problem has occurred and that leads to some sort of investigation and that leads to, holy something, this is a big problem and we probably need to solve it. And then we're already on the back foot and it's a bit late and we're having to put big changes in place and it's really hard to do that. It really is hard. So I understand that in itself is a disruption. It's probably caused by something going wrong, a disruption, a delay, something else alongside the project, but it's actually now causing its own delays. So that's just going to compound the issues going forward. And then the second question is, when should we know when something has gone wrong? And the same scale applies. Has anyone got any views? It's pretty obvious. It's a pretty loaded question. But it's more towards the proactive side. So we're thinking, right, how can we use the data that we're producing on site to actually make small incremental changes to the way that we're behaving, the activity that we're doing, to actually do something about it before it goes wrong. So our view is that that's another three elements. So first of all, high quality data that actually comes from source. It's actually happening right now on site. It's not got any conflicts of interest. It's not coming from one supplier and it's been able to be manipulated before it's received. So that's the first, that's the basis, that's the start of this discussion. The second is reliable connectivity. So if something goes wrong, we need to know about it straight away. So it can't work on some days and not on other days. It can't work in some areas and not in other areas. It needs to work when we need it to work. And then finally, actionable insights. So that's not a load of data that we have no way of interpreting, or that it's going to take data analysts time and time to look into it and to try and figure out what actually the problem is. We need to know about it. We need to know pretty much what the issue is that we need to resolve. and we need to know that as soon as we practically can. So Plinx's mission is to do more with less, and I think you mentioned that earlier, Stuart, in your opening statement. That is I'm sure on everyone's mind. You know, as any business, you need to do more with less. That's just the foundations. But as a safety solution provider, we're really it's really key that we focus on doing that safely. So if we're removing things, we need to make sure that we're still doing it in a safe manner. So Plinx is a system, it's a health and safety system at its core. So the immediate benefits of having Plinx on your site is improved safety. It is reminding people when they are in the wrong places. That may be in a zone where, you know, on a haul road, some sort of construction area, too close to a machine, or in an area where there's some sort of lifting operation. Just 3 examples of how that may work. But because we have sensors on site, we're actually generating information about what's going on in the construction environment, and therefore we're able to make better decisions. We're able to understand more about efficiency of people and of resources, people and machinery, and we're also able to understand a bit more about the environmental impact, the sustainability of our project. And these informations can be delivered in small chunks so that we can make change as we go and continuously improve. And it probably sounds really complicated, but essentially our system consists of, you can use these building blocks to solve the problems that you have on site. So just to give you some examples of one of safe, so it might be a people and plant interface. So for example, alerting both the machine operator and the pedestrian when a person is within an exclusion zone of a machine. Utilising 2 of the sensors. You might be looking at machine utilisation. I'll give you an example of how we've impacted a project later on. And it might also be using that same data that's produced from the machine element of the people and plant interface to both understand utilisation and carbon analysis, so to understand things like idle time or even underutilisation. So I'm just going to go on to 3 case studies of where we've actually done this, and I'll just talk to you about, you know, exactly how it worked. So, taking the safe example, on HS2, we implemented a hazard zoning system, which is essentially using geofencing plus a load of other information from the client to control access to zones based on role and competency. So this only alerted people that were in places where they weren't supposed to be, and it took that straight from the system that the client was already using to control access through the front door, essentially. And it was done as a trial. It was done to understand the behavioural impact of change over time. So over the 7 weeks of the initial 7 weeks of use across the site, we noticed a 91% reduction in unauthorised zone entrances. Now, unauthorised zone entrances are when someone may step into a zone, a warning zone, and they receive an alert. And 90% of the time, they turn around and they leave that zone. And so at the start, we were actually understanding more about the types of roles that were involved in these interactions. And typically, they were people that just didn't know that they weren't supposed to be entering these zones. They may not have had a briefing, or they just were asked to do a job that they didn't realise was hazardous. And in addition to that, we also noticed that extended zone breaches, which is when someone goes in and they continue within the zone even once they've received an alert, was reduced to 0. Now, this is really important because it actually, through the method of rebriefing the data that was produced on a daily basis, we're actually able to change behaviour on site. So to think, well, I can't just move that barrier and walk through. I actually am. This is being recorded, and it's important. So that's from a safety element. Secondly, from an efficiency point of view, we use the machine tag, that is one element of the people and plant interface, to understand machine utilisation. So we were asked by the client to look at how the machine was used on site. So we were analysing the movement of the machine, not just where it is, but how it's used. And we were also able to understand when it was, turned on, where it was stored, all those kinds of things, and we were able to allocate time to work zones. So, for example, certain sections of this site had the machine allocated to it at a certain time, so we could actually add a utilisation value for site-specific activity. So, through the period of analysis, we realised that the machine was actually only being utilised for 20% of the time that it was being paid to be on site for, which is a huge problem. And our client said, I know this. I'm sat in my office. I'm looking out the window. The machines are there. They're not being used. How can we better utilise the machines, or at least how can we better plan to actually make sure we are utilising this? So the client is trying to find out how they can do better, not how they can change other elements of other businesses within the supply chain. And just to give you a big number for that specific project, but we actually understood that the impact of the project of being able to, the size of the pie to the size of the low-hanging fruit to actually start to bite into was actually around about £3 million per year. So we're not saying you can get rid of that £3 million. We're just saying that through continuous monitoring and improvement, we can start to reduce that number to something that we would eventually accept, because there are practicalities on site of movement that we need to take into consideration. And then finally, sustainability. So on a similar project, we were asked as well, we need to understand what the CO2 emissions were for the machine. So again, we're understanding about the type of activity that machine's going through, and then we were also able to understand. So we understood in the end, that the total machine idle time accounted for 33% of the time that the key was turned. And that in itself across that same site was responsible for 396 tonnes of emitted carbon, which equates to a whole return flight from London to New York. Not just a couple of tickets, a whole flight. And I just have visions of fuel spitting out of jet engines when I'm saying that. But it's a huge problem, and it was a real tangible problem for the client. Now, we understand again there are other practicalities, and what we're saying here is not that we should stop idling, but we should understand the reasons for idling, and we should work with supply chain and with the contractors to make it as efficient as we can be, whilst not sacrificing employee wellness, for example. And so it's probably going to be a bit of a surprise, but I'm going to say that as a technology company founder, that technology cannot transform the industry on its own. We can't just press a button. We can't fit a sensor to something and just say, it will never do it again. There's a behavioural element that we all have a responsibility to get behind as a technology community. But we do believe that helpful timely reminders and greater transparency can help us make better decisions. And really, the ask at the end of this presentation is to say the industry needs you as industry professionals to put the good information that we're already producing, or that we have the capability to provide, as do others, to put that to work and actually make a change. So take that data and do something with it, continuously improve. There's already been some discussion this morning about trying stuff out, and if it fails, understand why, trying to implement that cyclical cycle of development, and really something the construction industry doesn't always do very well, and that's really what, if you can take anything away from what I've said today, that's what my ask would be, is that we need to be using data better. We need to be able to implement small changes here and there from the data that we're capturing, and if you do want to talk to me about what we do and how that can fit in with other elements of your project, please come and see me after. But at that point, I'd like to open the floor to any questions about what I've said, or if not, you can come and grab me after. It's fine. Go on.
How did you ensure that operatives on site?
So we understand when. So it requires good management. It requires good management at a site level. Every site's different. But explaining the benefits of the system from a safety point of view, and how that works. That was the building. That was the starting point. That was the foundations. and then understanding the reasons why they weren't being worn if they weren't. So we know when a sensor isn't being worn, but we need to make sure that the reason is reinforced as to why it's used, and we're understanding more about behaviour. Behaviour is the core of how we're going to improve data capture.
So was it then more behaviour initially, and then the realisation they were being tracked, so they were doing it, or was it they just didn't believe in the technology?
I don't think there's ever that. I think there's practical reasons. One reason might be, machine operators don't wear a helmet when they're in a machine, for example, and they've always not worn a helmet. So that's maybe one example, or forgetting their helmet when they're leaving a welfare, or for that kind of thing. I think it's well entrenched within construction companies to be wearing helmets, and for this to be a visible reminder whilst on site, and good management of that is key. But also transparency is really important. So the ability to be able to show the power of this data back to the guys on the ground. If you're not doing that, and it's like, well, he's looking at the screen with all the data and I'm walking around doing the work, that's never going to work. There needs to be transparency, needs to be more interactive briefings. This is all part of bringing technology into construction. It can't be forced with just by just saying press a button and it'll be done. That's not how it's going to work.